Usually we have focus groups to understand situations and perspectives. However, in this current moment, things are so dynamic that I thought the terminology refocus group might be more apt so that we can really take in the thoughts of others and wade into the uncertainty and the opportunities of this moment. I'm Dr. Jessica Evert, and I am the Global Medical Director of Child Family Health International. Welcome to Unpacking the Current Moment in Higher Education and Global Health. Child Family Health International is a nonprofit based in the Bay Area that provides global health immersion in partnership with universities and other institutions in higher ed. So we uniquely straddle both of these sectors, and I'm excited to encourage us all to continue to let the world change you. I also have the privilege of being here today, but I'm representing a team across 10 countries and want to recognize our global team and all our collaborators that make this work possible and meaningful. I want to introduce our panelists today. The first is Dr. Keith Martin, who has both an M.D. and a Ph.D. He is the founding executive director of the Consortium of Universities for Global Health, a physician, and a former Canadian member of Parliament. Keith has really been leading in the space of how universities are coming together to address the current realities, opportunities, and building coalitions. Dr. Eric Hartman is the executive director of the Center for Peace, Global Citizenship at Haverford College and co-director of the Community-Based Global Learning Collaborative. Eric has taught me a lot about what I know about fair trade learning, civic engagement, and global citizenship. So excited to have you here today. Dr. Michele Whitehead, Ph.D., is the Vice President of the Office of Global Citizenship for Campus, Community, and Careers at the American Association of Colleges and Universities. She leads national efforts in global learning and also interfaces between the disciplines of global health, higher education, student evaluation, and transformation. And last but not least, Dr. Kathryn Jacobsen, Ph.D., M.P.H., who is the William E. Cooper Distinguished University Chair and Professor of Health Studies at the University of Richmond. She's a global epidemiologist and textbook author. She's also a co-chair of GECO, the Global Health Educators Community, which is a gathering within CUGH that is essential for anyone who is teaching global health and public health. So welcome to our speakers. As we entertain this discussion, we are doing so in a moment that is quite unique. And it's difficult to overstate the nexus that we are at. There have been many shifts that are affecting our institutions, our foundational concepts, and the things that we hold near and dear. Those include, but are not limited to, shifts in the U.S. federal government's role and scope, both domestically and internationally. It also includes different viewpoints on what higher education is, has been, and should be. There is reconsideration of student loan forgiveness programs that have enabled college graduates in the United States to take lower paying jobs or often social justice oriented jobs in the nonprofit and social sectors. There's dialogue about what DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is, and its role in public and private institutions, and the list goes on. And so we are all here today to bring our perspectives to nurture safe environments for discussions, for grappling, for understanding where we are at and where we are going. So thank you to all of you for being here. I want to ask our panelists an initial question, which is an invitation really to reflect on the current moment. I'm interested in what you see as key dynamics, opportunities, and challenges. I will start with Dawn, if you don't mind opening us up.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks everyone for being here. As was mentioned earlier, I'm coming from the American Association of Colleges and Universities, so we're a Washington, D.C. based organization. And the perspective that I bring to this conversation is, Jess says, I do collaborate and work in the global health space, but I'm also going to bring a broader perspective of higher education. And I'm going to give a nod to some of the things that Jess started with. But I do think it's helpful to take a quick look back at the historical relationship between the federal government in the United States and higher education, and the historical role of the Department of Education to offer a bit of context for what some of us may have felt was a delayed reaction from higher education when we had this onslaught of attacks that have been coming in the last 115-ish days. So one of the things we know that in the United States, in this context, the federal government has historically made policy that impacts higher education. That includes establishing military academies, land grant institutions, housing, education benefits for veterans with the GI Bill, the Higher Education Act of 1965, which provided guaranteed student loans, need-based financial aid, grants, and work study. The Department of Education, of course, was elevated in 1979 to be a cabinet level agency. And again, those responsibilities of distributing federal financial aid, enforcing student civil rights, and oversight in collaboration with the state and accreditors of colleges and universities. And having said all that, we do know, and Jess talked about this, we're in a completely new landscape of higher education and what those roles are for the Department of Ed and with the relationship with the federal government. And we have seen, as Jess just said, significant government overreach and political interference. But at times when we think about the knowledge of the historical relationship between the federal government, the Department of Ed, and colleges and universities, and knowing the great potential of harm that could come if colleges and universities couldn't award financial aid, if colleges and universities didn't have the support they need, it does help understand how the shock and awe campaign that we all encountered really put us on our back feet, and really folks didn't know what to do or how to respond to it. But I think now we are settling and it's time for us to act. And so I think when I think about these dynamics, there was an article earlier this week, some of you may have read, by Amanda Taub in the New York Times, where she talked about this dilemma that several universities are facing, and law firms too, if you note, about, do you capitulate and strike a deal with the hopes of being spared, or do you stand up and risk harsher punishment? I think we all know and have seen firsthand that the initial reaction was to capitulate, strike a deal, and then we saw what happened to those that did that. The ask became heavier and heavier and more. And when Harvard received that recommendation, and they refused to comply with the demands, the Trump administration froze billions of dollars in federal funding, and Harvard fought back. That almost, as many of you are aware, opened the door for greater dissent. And we started to see public collective action at that point. I'm pleased to mention that I am from AAC&U, and our president collaborated with the American Academy of Arts and Sciences to think about what is it that we could do that would be constructive? What is it that we could do in this environment to bring people together? And one of the things that came out, you may be aware, and I'll put this in the chat a little bit later, is that we developed a statement on constructive engagement. So again, to say, if we are going to be effective as a sector, what is it that we need to be in place for these things? And again, it's truly a call for constructive engagement. And it's a need for us to come together as a field in higher education to speak with one voice. We are many different types of institutions, but it's time for us to speak with one voice against this unprecedented government overreach and the interference that we've experienced. When you look at the statement, we, of course, address academic freedom and the intrusion of practices and policies on those individuals that live, work, and learn on our campuses. And we offered a sound rejection of this coercive use of public research funding, which impacts all of us, particularly those that work in the global health space. We have seen that impact significantly. As a result, we were able to have just over 600 signatures, and we're hearing from more individuals and organizations who are collectively pushing back because people feel stronger when they're doing this in community. Many of you saw this. We heard more voices from presidents, more voices from leaders, after the SEVIS system and the government terminated over 1,800 international students and their visas that had their records terminated or visas revoked. We again saw collective feedback. NAFSA, other organizations spoke out. There were at least 65 lawsuits filed by attorneys. In that case, we did see a reversal, and that again is something that directly impacts us in this space. Thankfully, we have seen more coalitions emerge. Some of you may be from the Big Ten. We've got the Big Ten faculty, so a faculty-driven effort, the Big Ten Faculty Mutual Defense Compact, which has been signed by faculty senates at several Big Ten academic alliance universities. Again, they are fighting back on this ability of the administration to leverage financial and political power to weaken the administrative structures and governance in higher education and to infringe on the autonomy of the universities. Again, we will hear in a moment from CUGH and the work that CUGH is doing to have us come together and share our voices about the impact of this work. And then finally, just I think it was yesterday morning or this morning, these things come fast and furious, as you know, we learned that NIH will no longer allow grant recipients to make subawards to institutions outside the US. Those of us in this field, Eric and Jess know this quite well, and Kathryn as well. We cannot do collaborative international and global engagement that is reciprocal in this type of environment, in this type of structure. And yes, they've said, oh, we're going to have sub-grants that, or we're going to have a different system for grants where the international collaborators can apply separately, but we know that that's not the best model for collaboration when we do this work. Finally, I would just add that we are hearing the voice of funders. And it was interesting, a couple of weeks ago, there was a convening called Beyond 2025, which was the year that Lumina had cited to increase the number of Americans with post-secondary credentials. And at that meeting, a panel of funders were asked, are funders going to stand up in the gap? And one of the philanthropists said, it is not normal and it is not okay for philanthropy to do the work that the government has the resources to do. Yes, we're happy to try to fill in a gap, but all of the funders combined don't have the resources of the federal government. On a positive note, some of you may have seen Unite in Advance, which was a campaign by philanthropic organizations to assert their First Amendment rights to give as an expression of their own distinct values without interference from the government. And last week, the president of the Spencer Foundation announced a new rapid response bridge funding program. These grants of up to $25,000 obviously can't replace the millions that have been lost, but it's a start, and we're starting to see folks come together collectively. So to me, the positive, I said a lot of negative, the positive is that we are starting to see folks come together, and we're starting to see some movement. And for me, that is one of the most important things, that we come together in community and address these challenges as a group instead of trying to fight them individually or trying to remain silent and hoping no one sees us. So that's my response to your first question, Jess.
Thank you so much, Dawn. Keith, Dawn teased your role and organization. What are your thoughts? And I know you have some slides to share that Madeline will pull up. Keith, I think you're muted if you want to unmute.
Great. I'll have to sing your praises again. Thank you very much, Jess, for convening us and bringing us together at this really consequential time, as you and Dawn have both mentioned. I want to go back for a second and sort of, as you had the title, Unpacking the Current Moment. I want to just talk about what's happening. We know what's happening, but why is it actually happening? And this is going to be an uncomfortable conversation, I think, for some. It's hard to wrap your head around because it is unprecedented in the history of this country. It is not unprecedented in the history of some other countries, like Hungary and Russia in the 1930s, Germany. Academia is a target. Academia has a bullseye on its back. And academia is being attacked for some reasons, because academia is actually a structure, just like the legal system, the judicial system, the checks and balances within government, like the inspectors general, the media. These are all checks and balances on a government. So what this administration is doing, as was laid out in Project 2025, it wants to use the powers of the state to attack, destroy, and undermine those which actually can engage in dissent, scrutiny, and political opposition to things that an administration would be doing wrong. No other time, as everybody knows on this call, whether it's a Republican or a Democratic administration, have ever done this, because some of these actions violate the Constitution that underpins this country. So what we're seeing right now, through the use of lawfare, through the use of funds, through the use of the taxpayers, the public purse, it's an assault on academia. And so normally we would think, well, maybe this is just an issue of a government really trying to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse, or engage in things they don't like DEI or wokeism, as they like to call it. But really, those are just simply distractions. If it wasn't that, it would be something else. The target is academia, and we are being attacked as a result of that. There's other things that are being attacked, like aid and other areas, and part of that's being used to throw out as distractions to the real goal, which is to reorient the way that this country works, and to really empower the executive in a way that's never happened before, and in a way that in fact violates the Constitution, but it also enables in the structure the members of the administration and their supporters to enrich themselves in an unprecedented way by using the power of the state. And we've certainly seen that over the last 100 days in a way that has never happened before. So what does it mean for us, and what are we doing about it? Well, I know there's a real challenge and not antipathy, but it's concern about getting into the political arena, but we have no choice. And as Dawn shared wonderful examples, we need to get into the political space. We need to get into the political arena. We need to fight for what we believe in. Some things are right and some things are wrong. Global health is right. It can be reformed. It needs to be reformed, and it can be reformed. But that's up to us, and we will work with anybody who wants to be able to do that. So at CUGH, what we have done is several things. Number one, on the point Dawn mentioned in terms of mobilizing, on April the 9th, we mobilized leaders from different organizations to be able to come together initially and work together to have a common voice and to mobilize our members to be able to approach their congresspersons to oppose some of these actions that are so destructive to both higher education as well as to global health, and importantly, of course, to the very functions and structures of this country that so many gave their lives to be able to support and give us the freedoms that we have today. And I just want to make a note, May 8th was VE Day, where hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers gave their lives for the rights and freedoms we have today. And I want to just take a moment just to make sure we certainly never forget that, because those very freedoms and rights are being violated today here in this country and in other countries. So we mobilize people on the 9th. We're actually getting and asking for videos, short videos, that show the impact of these cuts and these actions by the current government. And the reason why we're doing that is we know that stories sell, visuals have impact, and we know that we have to appeal not only to the brain, but more importantly to the heart. So we're encouraging our members to tell the stories, and we will share the stories widely about what these impacts are. Secondly, we have put Dr. Dykins has put together a really wonderful survey to be able to identify and glean what the impacts of these are, and that will be written up in a paper that will be shared widely. We are also mobilizing individuals next week to deal with the cuts that were mentioned earlier to the subawards, which is so consequential to research in this country and globally. So those are some of the things that we're doing. And finally, what we're doing is getting that material, those videos, those materials, those talking points, and we are using our members to approach their congresspersons in their offices, in their districts. And this is important. Numbers matter. Politics is local. And right now, a lot of politicians, regardless of political stripe, including many in the Republican Party, are afraid to speak out. They're afraid because they may be primaried, but they're also, quite frankly, and this is disturbing, they're afraid for their public safety and public, the lives of themselves and their families, because there have been credible threats against anybody who speaks out against the president. There are threats to their lives. And that is a very disturbing situation. So what we can do to ameliorate that is here at CUGH is we're mobilizing the information, we're sharing it with our members, we're asking them to speak out and engage their congresspersons, and we're encouraging them to support the actions we want them to take, because those actions will make America stronger, healthier, and more powerful, as opposed to the current actions that are being taken by the administration, which is making America weaker, poorer, and less secure. We can get into some of the other things later on, but thanks very much, Jess, for this opportunity. And please look at our website, cugh.org, where we will be sharing all of the material we have. And we really appreciate your help. Everybody's on this call to be able to share that material, use that material, and please engage your congresspersons in their districts. All politics is local, and that's where the power of your actions will have the greatest resonance. Back to you, Jess.
Thank you so much, Keith. A lot to unpack of the unpacking. Kathryn, I'd love to invite your comments and reflections.
All right, thanks, Jess, and thanks, Keith. Your comments lead, I think, pretty well into mine, but I'm going to take a slightly different approach that is maybe a little bit more upbeat. We've now gotten a little depressed about our situation. It feels like global health is getting smaller this year. It feels like the boundaries of higher education in the US are shrinking at the same time. And I'd like us to take maybe an alternative way of looking at our situation and keep in mind that global health is big. Global health is big. So global health is not a function of how much money we invest in it, or it's not just about funding. Obviously, that's important, but it's not just about that. It's not just about global governance and all countries, including the US, being part of global conversations about global health. If every country dropped out of the Paris Agreement, climate change would still happen. And there would still be many scientists and advocates and non-state actors who would be working to promote sustainability. In the same way, we could say that global health isn't just about the World Health Organization and USAID and other multilateral organizations and international cooperation agencies. Global health is bigger than that. So global health, it's not just about medical care and public health services. It's about how every one of the SDGs affects health: economics, agriculture, education, gender, water and sanitation, energy, jobs, urbanization, the environment, peace, and there are like several others in that long list of SDGs. Global health isn't just about humans. It's also about animals and plants and ecosystems and all of the elements of the One Health framework. It's about all of the various dimensions of planetary health. So climate change, pollution, biodiversity loss, and other issues. Global health is so big that it bridges transnational concerns with local actions all around the world. It's about human rights and the ways that groups of people choose which issues to prioritize and where we're going to advocate and invest. And it's about the policies and practices that arise from all sorts of global health partnerships and education partnerships around the world. And global health is about globalization. and all of the ways that economic, political, and social integration affect population and planetary health. So it's true that the current nationalistic movements, isolationist movements, are placing restrictions on the ways we engage economically and politically, but they don't restrict our social connections, whether those are personal or professional. And we have people dialing in today from all over the world. That doesn't go away just because some of our funding and political situations change. So it's true that we have some new challenges in the current political environment, but global health is still just as big as it was before. It's just more complicated. So in this moment, I would say one of our jobs as people who care about this enough to dial in the middle of our work days is to make sure that we don't start making global health smaller than it really is. We need to keep global health big. So how do we go about doing that? So I'd say first, we collectively have to get better at explaining what global health is. Those of us who teach in global health, who serve as mentors in the field, we have to do a better job of explaining what global health is, why it matters, and why education in global health is relevant and useful, even as the job situation changes, the funding, the politics. Global health still matters. So education about global health still matters. People who are students or trainees in global health are going to have to get better at explaining to potential hiring managers how their global health knowledge and skills apply to a wide range of work areas. And that's something that groups like CFHI and AAC&U and CUGH can help us all do better, to talk about how, in the big picture, this is helping. Second of 3 points here would be that we need to be able to hold on to our own sense of global citizenship and the values that come with that. Compassion, empathy, a commitment to human rights, social justice, the principle of human equality, and all of the other values that motivate us individually and within our communities of practice. We aren't letting go of those and making that smaller. And then third, we need to be intentional about creating and sustaining communities of practice within global health and global education that help us maintain our identities as global citizens and global learners. And that will help us get better at explaining what global health is and why it matters. And there are lots of resources for this. So one is participating in conversations like this one. And that might mean signing up for a lot more email listservs, so you're getting invitations and information in a timely manner. Another is becoming active in groups like CUGH, the Consortium of Universities for Global Health. For educators writ large, I invite you to sign up for the GECKO mailing list. GECKO is the Global Health Educators Community. We host monthly conversation groups online. We help connect our members with one another and with external resources. There are also opportunities for educators to connect through events like the upcoming Teach Global Health Summer Institute that will be held next month in Pennsylvania. And I think that you can still apply this week if you'd like to attend. teachglobalhealth.org gives you all the information about that. And I know the other presenters here, as we move into a time of conversation in a few minutes, will have other ideas for how you can connect with global health communities that will support your personal and professional development as we all work to keep global health big.
Thank you, Kathryn. I really appreciate that. It's an enormous challenge, both literally and figuratively, but I'm glad you raised us up to it. Eric, what are your thoughts on this moment, opportunities, challenges, and dynamics?
Sure. I'm just going to share a couple of thoughts right off the cuff that have been occurring to me in pretty recent time, and then share some prepared remarks about the moment that we're in, some of the things I'm struggling with. Just one thing I wanted to remind everyone of, I'm sure this is true for my colleagues or it might be different, but I'm speaking for myself. It seems especially important to say these days. as a citizen. And I suppose that others have spoken for their organizations, but I'm just speaking in my own capacity as a person who thinks about civic and global scholarship. One huge challenge that I think is so very difficult is that the actions of the Trump administration reinforce dichotomization. And dichotomization is our enemy as thinkers, as scholars, and as people who believe that people are complex and restorative and in need of love and community. And so we have to figure out some way to be better than constantly going into re-dichotomization, despite the temptation. There's 77 million fellow Americans who supported Trump with a vote. I work a lot with restorative justice, so I work with and learn from people who have murdered. So do my students. My students seem to find it easier to connect with people who have murdered than people who have voted for Trump sometimes. You know, the dichotomization in our country is so extreme, and we've got to find ways to think beyond it. Even a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So what's going on? What's leading people, connecting people? I will say for myself, one, I'm still learning. I really appreciated when Senator Murkowski said, we're scared, we're all scared. I'll admit, Jess, are you kidding me? Do we want to talk about this right now out loud and in public? But I think it's really important and I appreciate it. In that vein, I also want to offer that let's please those who find themselves to be resisting specific actions, resisting actions that bother me. Let's not overly critique one another for different kinds of resistance, some of which can be very quiet and strategic in that way. Doesn't always have to be a fist, shaking fists. If you're shaking your fist, wonderful, I support you. You know, so in the spirit of continuing to learn, just yesterday the Chronicle released a new podcast. They were interviewing someone at Claremont McKenna College, who's identified as a conservative political scientist, who had this concern that there's no robust conservative presence on higher ed campuses. And he said, we have a real problem right now in that the actions of the currently leading Republican Party is fundamentally not conservative in that it's radical. It's radically breaking institutions. And the function of a conservative movement is always to protect and preserve. And so we find ourselves in an odd position where there are so many new alignments and new opportunities maybe, but we really have to be continuously examining our assumptions. So we have a new pope, and he is from the United States. And I don't know, but I'm going to talk about human dignity in a moment. And I'm hopeful that that's a really smart civil society move by a civil society entity that represents 1.5 billion people on the concept of human dignity, which is at the root, of course, of so much of your incredible global health work. It is different to have a pope from the States. Graduated from Villanova, speaking of Pennsylvania again. So in a way, I think that some of the support that went behind Donald Trump in the oddest kind of way was actually calling for more attention to intersectionality, not less, right? Like that's a DEI word. Sometimes we treat class and race as if they're at odds, but actually they're complex and interrelated. And I think attending to that is what great global health and public health folks do. And in a way, what is maybe move, I don't know why people vote as they vote, but I do know there's a lot of new patterns. And there's a way to argue very clearly that the Republican Party is the party of the working class and the party of the less educated who have less resources. And those tend to be the people who are concerned with global health and marginalized populations believe themselves to be fighting on behalf of. So how do we get into that a little bit? The opportunity then for me becomes, how do we enable support for liberalism, pluralism, conventional institutions, and move forward? And that's where I'm just going to share a bit of my own reflections that I wrote a little while back before Pope Francis passed away. So for some context. So Christians are lobbying again. Earlier this year, sorry, let me just get my screen squared away. Earlier this year, Pope Francis' letter to U.S. bishops affirmed the infinite dignity of all. Sojourners is organizing weekly vigils at the U.S. Capitol, rallying against the Trump administration's cuts. Hearing an interview with Sojourners president, Reverend Adam Russell Taylor, took me right back to a conference I helped organize in 2018. It was called Dignity and Justice for All in Global Service Learning. The community gathered there had a knee-jerk reaction against the opening speakers, one of whom was Reverend Taylor. They critiqued Reverend Taylor, saying he was too white presenting, his mother's Black, so he's too male and too centrist. The conference was hosted by the University of Notre Dame, so the room where he spoke included a large crucifix, which several attendees said was a constant reminder of colonialism. Contrasting today's Christian lobby with recent leftist judgment points toward a classically liberal centrism, embracing rights, dignity, and differences. Too often, and I think we have to wrestle with that, progressive communities have relied on sloppy scripts. It's not only progressives who do this, but it's academics who are paid to be more rigorous. So the keynote speaker, of course, should be engaged for their ideas. Catholicism's rich tradition of social thought is a driving force animating commitment to human dignity across many democratic constitutions worldwide. When the UN Declaration of Human Rights came around, it was the Latin American Catholic countries that added social, economic rights. That always aspirational commitment to common human dignity is itself a cultural artifact, one of the central achievements of liberalism, the intellectual tradition that gave rise to democracy and human rights. It reflects a set of global heritages irrevocably intertwined with colonialism and modernist development. We who identify as progressive activists must re-engage the hard work of wrestling through these contradictions. The human rights and self-determination for which so many individuals and peoples appeal are made real through the unmistakably colonial institutions of state bureaucracies. Yet many academics and organizers are stuck in an anti-institutional approach, or at least were until very recently. It may be their only point of agreement with the MAGA movement. The Trump administration's moves against normies and normative democratic assumptions serves as a stark reminder. Democracy is also state policy, it is stability, it is a reasonably well-paid police officer who is committed to upholding the law, the Constitution, and due process. Abolishing many parts of the state is now well underway, and it is not delivering leftist dreams of radical inclusion and global solidarity. Before Pope Francis' letter and Reverend Taylor's weekly vigils, Washington Episcopal Bishop Marion Bood famously pleaded with the new administration to have mercy. Each of the Abrahamic traditions and many other faiths and worldviews suggest there is something sacred about every human life. But these faith leaders understand that suggestion does little without institutional arrangements in this world. As the MAGA movement exercises its raw power, punishes its detractors, and scapegoats immigrants, it must clarify its commitments to democracy. A country with democratic freedoms will enforce policies evenly across various unpopular groups and ideas. There are murmurings of right-wing concern for equal treatment trickling in. Alan Dershowitz pointed out Mahmoud Khalil is constitutionally protected. Ann Coulter reminded her followers that protesters have rights. But this kind of concern is clearly coming far too lightly and frequently and slowly. Part of living in a culture that believes in democracy and human rights is the commitment to struggling with policy through the lens of human equality and dignity first, then judiciously applying state power or leveraging institutional bureaucracy to spread healthcare second. To promote, protect, or preserve a democracy is not an exercise in power alone. These values, seeing dignity across all humans, even those with whom we disagree, and carrying our understanding of the world tentatively, knowing our lens is only one approach, have intellectual and theological roots that predate the United States. They are the kind of ideals that inform the founding fathers as they set forth to create the conditions among which people of different faiths might live well together. Scholars like Danielle Allen at Harvard, Kwame Anthony Appiah at NYU, Paul Carisse at Arizona State, and maybe in a more public way, Ubud Patel with Interfaith America are refreshing these ideals for our era. They demonstrate that democracy does not manifest without attention to our extraordinary shared heritage, our collective institutions, and our willingness to respect one another. I have a couple of resources that I'm happy to drop into the chat. They're very committed to public expression, but I think I went over 8 minutes slightly, so I'll tie it up there and just say, in the sweep of human history, commitment to that assertion that all people are created equal remains our radical shared project.
Thank you, Eric. That was beautiful. And I appreciate that call out of the basic tenets.
The other thing I really
So we have some time for discussion and Q&A. We have a question that came in initially earmarked for Dawn, but I'll invite anyone to respond. Dawn, in your opinion and others, what do student civil rights mean given the federal government is defining these toward an upside down view of justice? And I'm going to try and rephrase that. I want to encourage us all to use the plainest language possible, but I think what that may mean is that people who traditionally have power and privilege are being framed as having less power and privilege and being those that need to be boosted up. But perhaps I'm misinterpreting that question. But Dawn, do you have thoughts on that?
I do, thank you. And I put a few a little bit of a response in the Q&A tab, but I think there has been a shift. If you look specifically at the language, if you listen to what Secretary McMahon is saying, that the Office of Civil Rights within the U.S. Department of Education, their focus has shifted. You can see that they are looking into one of the priorities based on their actions and based on their words is the participation of transgender athletes in girls and women's sports. That again is not something that the Office of Civil Rights, as you said, historically has done, but it has been, that is how it's being framed by those in power, and that is how things are changing. So I think we are seeing a shift with the office being guided by the perspective of the secretary and of course of the president of the United States.
Thank you. Are there other thoughts from the panelists on this concept of upside down justice and positionality in terms of power and privilege and how that's impacting global health, higher education, and other aspects of the work?
I'll just say that the challenge that I think that comes upside down is dichotomizing. And one I said in my comments, even a broken clock's right twice a day. A different way to think about that is, I think there's a way in which that MAGA political movement builds support through a game I recognize as two truths and a humongous lie. And looking for the truth, I think, is really important. And so, for example, the way that anti-Semitism is being weaponized to undermine higher ed is clearly strategically ugly. And it has prevented us from having more sophisticated conversations about some things that many people recognized as utterly inappropriate that happened within the last year. And so how do we create a space that gets beyond that either or, even as we resist the horrific set of actions such as immigrant deportations and defunding, et cetera, et cetera. There's some absolute hard no's out there. And then there's this whole public engagement conversation challenge that I think we'll have to get beyond dichotomies.
Thank you. The next question I want to maybe direct at Keith initially, but would invite all of your comments. Colonialism was brought up by multiple people on this panel and is something that global health has long grappled with. And at the CUGH conference this past spring, there was discussion during some of the keynotes of the opportunities that it presents for low and middle income countries that the United States pulled out support for programs like PEPFAR and other global health initiatives. Keith, is there a silver lining here? And what are your thoughts on the argument that the shifts in the federal government actually help to deconstruct colonial dynamics in global health?
I do not think that this government cares a whit about decolonizing anything at all. You don't eviscerate ODA and think you're going to make things better at all. A part of things is difficult. I had this conversation, quite frankly, today. We had a call today about an example in Zambia, and there's an article today in The Guardian where the U.S. ambassador in Zambia said that they were going to cut $60 million worth of funding for drugs, for HIV control, and for other infectious diseases. And he goes on to say the reason for doing this is because there's been a massive fraud and waste and theft of these funds. And in the same press release, he goes, we're happy to announce that our investments have actually collapsed mother-to-child transmission, HIV rates. So in effect, what he said within his own press release, he's contradicted himself. Because how on one hand can you possibly have massive theft of drugs, while on the other hand admit that the drugs that you've donated have had an incredible effect on the lives of people? So it's nonsense. It's a flat out lie, in fact. So, so this government doesn't care about it at all. A lot of those cuts are actually used as a distraction, as I mentioned before, to the larger goal, which is reconstructing how this country actually operates, with a small number of people controlling the levers of power. That the executive power would have absolute power in violation of the Constitution that will enrich the few at the expense of the many. But on the other hand, they're baiting their base and taking advantage, quite frankly, of a lot of people in this country who are left out. Absolutely. They are not privy to the benefits. They are hurting. They can't make ends meet. They don't have housing. They are having problems putting food on the table. And those are deep and real concerns. But this administration, I mean, in a grotesquely immoral way, are preying upon those concerns, those fears, and they're using them to enrich themselves, enrich the powerful and the super rich. However, what we're doing at CUGH, and I'm happy to say, Jess, and to everybody, that our next conference will have a major focus on what will global health look like in the future, because there will be another administration, and now is the time to put our collective heads together to build forward better, to do things better, to have better outcomes, to use money more wisely, and to your point, to work with our colleagues that you and I and Kathryn and many of the listeners here, viewers here today, we worked with us and our colleagues in LMICs to be able to strengthen their capacity to do what they want. And so this is a great way to build forward better. That's what our conference will be. We'll be focused on primarily, but we're also going to be working with our partners here to be able to advance that other vision of global health that will have a greater impact. And finally, to be able to articulate, to your point, to the American public, your investments in global health are benefiting you to be healthier, wealthier, and more secure because of the following reasons. So we're going to do a better job with you and everybody else in this effort.
Thank you, Keith. Looking forward to it. Kathryn and Eric, you're both at state and locally based institutions, and Keith mentioned that all politics are local. Dawn mentioned a regional Big Ten conference coalition of faculty. As the federal government makes shifts, I wonder if you could comment on your thoughts on state-based or regionally based initiatives to counteract or to head in a different direction.
I think Eric and I are both saying, no, you first. It is such a rapidly changing terrain that it feels premature to have any sense of what those might look like. I used to be at a public university. I'm now at a private university. And so the pressures are different. The resources are different as well. It is tricky. We're concerned about things with, for anything that we do, whether you're working directly in education or in global health more broadly, right? Day to day, we don't know in the US what will be cut next, what long established policies will change next. We don't know if, for example, the federal financial aid system for students could suddenly change this summer. There's a lot of uncertainty. There are good groups. Dawn may be able to speak to some of that, like AAC&U, where university leaders are pooling resources and working on compacts where groups of universities will respond together to events that happen, so that perhaps that slows individual colleges and universities being targeted. That doesn't mean that the pressures won't be there over the summer and beyond, but having a little bit of space and time, and again, that idea of communities of practice that I mentioned earlier, where we can pool our wisdom, pool our resources, and try to anticipate what might happen and how we respond. But unfortunately, there is no clear path forward. And at the state and local level, it's going to be very local or very state specific how organizations are able to navigate that situation and respond.
Thanks. And I come at this, of course, from a civic education perspective, and want to share, I think, both how we think about the educational process in relation to this question, and also the opportunities for statewide policy as kind of nod toward. So at Haverford College here, about 90% of our students are from no place nearby, like just not from the region whatsoever. So I try to think about our area as almost as one would an international experience. It's a culturally unfamiliar space. So we work with our students to have them understand your municipalities, your jurisdictions are Haverford Township, which township sounds really small, but it's 49,000 people. So it's similar to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's larger than many capital cities. And if you're interested in things like safe streets, well, that's your space. Pennsylvania is bigger than 120 countries in the world by population. It's bigger than 170 countries in the world by economy. It is a massively important jurisdiction. So really trying to have students attend to, we are all, oh well, there are a lot of people deeply concerned with various activities that the Trump administration is taking on. But if we care about sustainability, safe streets, if we care about state level policy questions, environmental preservation, environmental sustainability, we can really exercise a great deal by attending to those jurisdictions. Unfortunately, as you all know quite well, there's so much, it's a federal system. So the national government matters. In Pennsylvania, along with many others, I've been part of launching a statewide campaign around international student and scholar inclusion. And that statewide campaign really highlights every jurisdiction, 8 different media markets across the state, Central, Lehigh Valley, et cetera. What's the impact, economic impact of international students and scholars? And of course, local businesses care about this, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a different avenue into a really important conversation around inclusion. So we're doing that and asking the Shapiro. You're all pretty news-informed people, so you probably know Governor Shapiro, but if you don't, you will. He's a person doing a lot of quiet fighting right now, but trying to understand what the Shapiro administration can do in conflict or contrast with the national government as it relates to protecting international students and scholars. The last thing I'll say about this question is just, it's still so hard to do real cross-ideological dialogue on our campus in any case. And that's partly geographical, it's partly self-sorting, it's, there's so many things that can contribute to that. It's different on every campus. One thing that I saw out of the University of Pennsylvania that I've personally found inspiring, a faculty member in the SNF Paideia initiative around democracy, is doing a bus tour around the state to do dialogues and to expand the way dialogue. When we stay on our campuses, we can do dialogues with the perspectival set that is on campus. I've been working to help our students understand our campus population. I might get the number wrong. It's 0.0000371% of the population in the world. And so humility does need to be part of these conversations.
Thank you for that. Time for one final question / reflection. And Alexa Smith, who is at a public university, brought up the moral and cognitive dissonance between feeling like the university has to follow the rules, but the rules potentially being harmful. I want to dovetail this with a focus on self-care. There's a quote by Layla Delia, who's a writer and wellness expert, and she says that self-care is how you take your power back. So my closing question for you all is, how are you caring for yourself in this moment, and how do you encourage others to do so? And I would love to start with Kathryn.
Yeah, for me, it's all about finding communities like we have here, where we can talk through the questions, the concerns, the anxieties that are happening in this moment. We may not be able to solve any of these problems, but we can focus in on our shared values, on our shared hopes and visions, and we can plan ways to react in the moment and plan for the future. So, again, thank you for hosting this. For those who are speakers today, for those who are sending in their Q&A questions, sharing in the chat, all of that is really important in this time.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. Keith, what are your thoughts on self-care and sustaining?
Well, just be kind to yourself, be kind to others. As Kathryn said, we are part of we're really blessed to be part of an amazing group of people. And we can lean on each other, right? And things go up, things go down. This is not forever. The world will change. Make sure you eat well, have fun, get sleep, get exercise, all the things we know as physicians, and pace yourself, right? I always personally, I find the beauty in small things wherever I go. And, you know, as what I think maybe Carl Sagan or somebody said, if you think of what are the chances of us being on this planet, they're alive in the planet, and in the privileged lives we lead, we're probably, the chance of that is about 1 in about 100 trillion. So we're pretty lucky.
Love that. Thank you. Eric, what are your thoughts?
One, thanking you all and agreeing about the bit about community. I want to share a little bit on that in a second. But thank you, Keith, for that comment about pace yourself. It took me right back to Congressman John Lewis, who said it in his voice and his way in some of his speeches and talks. And to think about his trajectory and pace yourself is a really inspiring notion to hold right now. So gathering and community of shared values is so vital. I wanted to share the Community-Based Global Learning Collaborative will have an institute in November in Savannah, Georgia. And we're doing that in Savannah because we have a wonderful hosting organizational network there, but also because we want to be in spaces where people are doing complex work around justice in ways that are ideologically diverse and rich. And we know that the United States holds so much in that respect around the world. So gathering in community, pacing yourself, and as the kids say, touching grass, getting away from the screens, and gardening or whatever it is for you.
Thank you. And Dawn, can you take us home with your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. So I think for me, I echo the thoughts that have been shared by my colleagues, especially gathering in community in terms of folks in this space. But I also go a step further. So for me, where I have found real solace is in the arts. So I have always had a great appreciation for the arts. And in times like this, as Keith said, we've been here before, maybe look different, but the arts are a wonderful place to go and a wonderful place to see. This is not for everyone, but I think I know I have seen the movie Sinners 3 times and had different conversations with different groups of people to talk about different aspects of the filmmaking, of the history, of other dimensions. And so finding, my communities in the arts, that is something that has been freeing and liberating for me in the midst of all that's going on.
Thank you so much. I invite our attendees to type any final thoughts, reflections, or intentions in the chat. I know only a few of us can be on a panel, but in the spirit of the community that we are and that we want to be, please type any thoughts, reflections, inspiration. There was a question that we didn't get to around how to message DEI in ways that are less politically charged, and people will be open to listening and creating shared understanding. So any thoughts anyone has on that? And lastly, I just want to echo Eric's sentiments around caring for our community members, irregardless of their political persuasions, socioeconomic status, life experiences, and putting ourselves outside of our comfort zone so that we can better understand each other and what brought us to this moment and how we move forward together.